talk to me about how you prioritize self-care in your life and what that looks like for you.
I think like most people, it has been a journey, and I don't even remember really understanding or hearing the concept of self-care until, maybe 8 years ago. And even that, it was often in the context of, bubble baths and marketing and face masks. And those things are great too, because it's the concept of you are taking time to focus on yourself or do something for you. But I also think maybe from the South, maybe just from my own narratives, self-care felt selfish. And it was a very confusing concept to understand. It feels very elusive. Yeah. And so I think in ways I tried to be aware of like my wellness or my own self-health. Like those are other phrases that I think I could somewhat grasp onto, but also in the midst of transplant and having a new baby and all the things and trying to, in a lot of ways, be disembodied and shut down emotions because I did not know how to deal with those things. The story of most is that like you have breaking points, like your body eventually says, no more, I cannot do this. And so that has happened in a few different ways over the last few years. And then you just can't deny it when your physical body is like, yo, I'm still here. We need to do some things for you.
Yes.
Like, how are we going to keep going in life? So for me, self-care is something that has to be evaluated in different stages and seasons. A big aspect tends to be like social, water, learning, and story. Like those are four things that I can usually tell, and food, and so those are the different kind of buckets I tend to gravitate toward and kind of see, and the tanks that I can see going down in seasons and actually have a measure. And like for water, for example, that might be bubble baths, that might be in the hot tub, that might be going to a lake or an outdoor water paddle boarding. Yeah. But even seasonally, those are very different things.
Sure.
And you can participate in all of these and not be in a moment of self-care at all. Like you can be completely numb and zoning out.
Yes.
Doing it. And so it's like, well, if you're just drinking coffee and checking your email and scrolling on your phone or doing 100 other things, you're probably not having that moment. Whereas if you actually breathe for a second and think about what do I want to bring in today? 10 seconds. It's not like a million hours. That's a very different type of moment. So I think in a lot of ways, how I prioritize it is naming it, like most things, naming it, realizing that I do have to be higher on my list than at the very bottom of things to take care of in my life, sharing with others. And in a lot of ways, because I am one that likes to learn and grow, and I have to have it as a prayer. I listen to a lot of podcasts and read books and try to have it just in my language and in my world, so that it doesn't just go by the wayside, because I do think partially, again, like how I was raised and what I know would very easily push it down and kind of be like, we'll deal with that later. We'll deal with that in retirement.
Yes.
Later at a different stage. So that's kind of a roundabout answer to what my self-care journey in life and what it looks like.
Well, and you touched on an important thing too, and we'll get to this in a minute in talking about how your emotional health affects your physical health. We'll dive into that a little bit more because, absolutely. And I think too, it's so interesting to me culturally, how that feeds into what we do and where we grow up and what the kind of the cult doctrine is telling us around us. You don't really think about it until you're like, whoa, wait a minute. I've been hearing this since I was 5 years old. No wonder it's, ingrained in me. Confidently setting boundaries. So how do you make space for this self-care? Because again, you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. I mean, with your work and your kids and being a partner and, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think the word boundaries can feel really extreme and can bring these images of, okay, I need hours to set aside here, or I need to have this person be my best friend or totally cut out of my life. Like these really big swings. And what I have learned often in my life is boundaries are having just usually a small detailed guardrail to give some structure to actually provide me some time and space for these moments. So maybe that is, I'm not going to be scrolling on my phone after 9 p.m. on weeknights, or I'm not going to check my work email after 7 or 5 or whatever time works, or I'm not going to take family phone calls after or before this time and age, or while I'm playing on the ground with my kids, I'm going to have my phone in a different room so I can really be present in this moment. And then I'm going to really be present the next, or I need to tap out for 15 minutes and I'm going to go on a walk, or I'm going to be by myself in this area. So in this life stage that I'm in, it is not usually I'm going away for a weekend, or a huge block of time, or I'm starting this whole new venture. But I also think that works too. And sometimes that is what's needed. But often I think it's naming the specific, like you have these big universal feelings often, or kind of a hole, like you can feel like you need, maybe it's, I don't feel like I have any friends. I don't feel like I've sat down at all. And so you get really huge about this. And like, there's no one and it's like, no, you need to meet one friend this week for 1 hour. And then let's see how we feel. Like, come back to it, right? Or just different things like that. So for me, it's often smaller boundaries of how am I making space for myself? Like one thing that I tried a few years ago that I still have kept almost consistently is that when I am out somewhere or with somebody and they ask me, oh, can you be a part of this? Or can you do this? Or would you be interested in throwing the shower or helping in this thing or going on this trip, whatever. I do not answer for 24 hours. Like I try to give a good answer in that moment. That sounds really awesome. I really need to check my schedule. I would love to do that if I can fit that in this season. Let me get back to you. Because I tend to in the moment be like, well, yeah, of course I want to do this. This sounds great. This sounds awesome. I can make it work.
Yeah.
And 24 hours usually helps me really evaluate, okay, yes, that is something I want. Or sometimes, no, how can I, or what can I do in a different way? I'm not going to help join this whole committee to have this event, or I'm not going to coach that kid's team. I will set up the snacks, or what else can I offer?
Sure.
That kind of thing that sometimes is just even allowing you a little buffer space ends up being a big self-care help in letting you buy back time later, if that makes sense. Because I do tend to get like very overcommitted if I'm not careful. So,
well, I think that's a great boundary in itself. It's just that 24 hours. And I love the word you used earlier, guardrails. I think that's such a smart word and a good visual for people, especially in your stage of life when you're doing a balance on all those things. And it makes it seem less overwhelming too. Just how you've kind of identified those things and how they all add up. All those little things add up into feeling like you've got some space and time to breathe and think and a little bit of semi-delusional control over your life. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
All right. Okay. How we talked about this earlier, and I want to touch on it again, taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health, because you mentioned about how during self-care, it kind of, your body kind of got your attention. Dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I am a very external processor. And so I often will need, whether it's a person or a book or a journal, whatever, some way to move through and realize even my emotions and things, because I can explain, or in my mind, I'll have kind of the generalization of what's happening. But until the words are often, coming out of my hand or out of my mouth, I don't realize, oh, hey, that felt this way. Or all of us tend to have a few emotions that we identify with really strongly. So for me, that's anger. Anger is one I can go to really fast. It is really hard for me to actually name, was that anger? Was that actually sadness? Was that disappointment? Is that a resentment? And I'm not going to take the time usually if I'm in a space where I just feel that big red or big emotion.
Sure.
Unless if you kind of have a way through that. And so a lot of times for me, that has been through social, but other ways, often even just moving my body, whether that's exercise or going on a walk or doing a genuine physical activity. And then too, I think a lot of the physical practices like drinking water, getting good sleep, eating foods that nourish you. They feel so basic, but at least for me, in those harder seasons or stressful seasons or times of crisis, or when my general emotional or mental health is on a downward, that is one of the first things to go. And so I think even just acknowledging, hey, like, whoops, I probably haven't done great. I'm thirsty.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily eating great, or I haven't made time for this. And so I think the practices that I use are, one, sharing openly with the people around me, because I don't see that always. So sometimes it takes family or friends to be like, hey, how's this going for you? Or I've kind of noticed that, and allowing them space. And of course, you're going to get defensive often because that's going to be your initial reaction. But again, having that trust and background to share and think about, okay, wait, yes. Okay, let me evaluate. They might not be right, but also they may, because other people often see it better than yourself.
Yeah. And they know this about me.
Right. And just building it in. I think in some ways you do have to, much like self-health and care, value emotional health and have that be something that, you're working toward. And in my family, I see it a lot because I'm raising kids and I am trying to raise them with very different emotional language. They're also in schools where they're talking about their emotions and mindfulness meditation, like all these things that I did not have tools for. Right. And so I do often see these behaviors mirroring in my kids or triggering me.
Wow.
And then with foster families, you just have to do a lot of training that's all about trauma-informed parenting. And so there are a lot of things in my life that I've again, kind of almost pulled forward to this, to be a priority and to be a service, that I do have to address it and think about it consistently, which just brings in time for reflection because you're already doing those things. Yeah, but it's a journey. Like I said,
absolutely
times and moments. And almost always it's not until I'm in the hospital or, my health has crashed where I'm like, oh wait, yeah, no, it's been 6 months, or seasonally, like, oh yeah, every January.
Yeah.
Or every September, I kind of fall into this routine or rut or pattern.
I think it's, and especially for you, a transition from a weather standpoint, from, Texas to Portland. Portland's got definitive seasons and definitive, gray, rainy days and, definitive, so it's a little different dynamic. There's not 300 days of sunshine. Now you've got trees and mountains and all those other different kinds of things you can enjoy, but that was probably just an adjustment too, even.
Right. Totally.
And it's amazing how that can throw you. And it's also interesting too, how the things that we need the most are the things that go first: the sleep, the water, the food. It's like, time out, wait a minute. I mean, my shortness in my fuse is so markedly different when I'm tired, thirsty, hungry than otherwise. And I think it's so interesting how it's like, it's really sometimes just gets down to the basics and making sure.
Like an actual toddler. Yeah. It's like a baby. You see these things.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, we're still having these major basic needs. And it really influences how the days go.
Yeah, it does. It does. And how you navigate those emotions and interact with people. And I think too, just a good reminder of exactly, we always need these things, and it's okay to put them in your schedule. I think sometimes people feel like it loses authenticity if you put it in your schedule. But I'm like, if I set my alarm that I'm going to stop and breathe for 2 minutes and ground myself, that makes a huge difference in my day, because it's really easy to just go into autopilot and cruise through the to-do list and not stop and feel what you're feeling. Like, whoa, I'm just, and just take a step back. How can we support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically? Because you said something at the beginning that you're like, oh, I'm going to have you introduce me every time, which was great. And I love that. At the same time, we should be doing that for each other all the time. That should not be like, I think, and it's something that we feel like, oh, that's so great. It's like, no, that's what we do. How do we, so talk about that, because it's an interesting time for women as we find our place and we find these new doors that are opening finally, that we've been trying to crash through these ceilings and doors for years. But sometimes we forget, we get so single-minded on, this is my opportunity, I can't lose it, that we take out other women along the way instead of bringing them along with us.
I agree with that. And I also think we don't prioritize a lot of those relationships, just like it's the first thing to go. Or authentically. Like sometimes we get in this kind of, I need to network or market, or I really want to break into this group of friends or people or thing. And it can get kind of lost in the shuffle of, but am I actually sitting down and connecting with people? Am I even sharing with them? How can I be supportive of you in this season? Or what's a really cool thing that you're doing? And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. Like, for example, I have a lot of friends right now that do MLM things. One of my boundaries, I do not attend these events. That is something that I just do not tend to do. So when that comes up and when they say, hey, can you come to this thing? Or I'm going to throw this Facebook party or whatever. Being clear and kind, I think, is also a big way to actually support other people so that they know who you are and what's going on. And you don't feel like, what was the story behind the story on that kind of thing. I'm just like, hey, I actually don't do that in this season, but I would love to champion you on social media. Or if I have friends that are looking for this product, like, I'm going to send them to you. Can I get a card? Or just different ways to show your support can look like a million things. Maybe it is going to these events. Maybe it is bringing them up with you and mentoring. Maybe it's helping find a job. Maybe it's just sharing on social media and writing a comment, or texting your mom friend and really sharing like, oh my goodness, our house, and parenting is crazy right now. Hope you guys are having a good week. And if not, let's go get margaritas next Tuesday or whatever, little things. And I think too, what I've also seen is with a lot of women, we will be the first to help and then last to ask for help. And so I have really tried, after listening to, I think it was a podcast a few years ago, where a woman was like, I actively try to ask for little practical helps to people in my life, big and small, ones that they realize, hey, she's actually willing, like, this is a way I can help her. And then people are often more in that reciprocal, they'll think of you later. And it's hard. It is so hard. actually be like, hey, could you bring a meal this week? Or can you take the kids to this thing? Or I really need help on this work project. Could you take a quick look over it? Whether you actually necessarily have this crisis need for it or not, I do think that there's an invitation. And when people actually see you doing that and supporting them and being open and going first in a lot of ways, it gets mirrored. And or you attract people who are, interested in that type of relationship and opportunity. But yeah, I think a lot of it is like we were talking about originally, like just even having the value and the desire and the care to live unapologetically and authentically yourself, but also take the time because it does take time and energy to think about what friend did I need to follow up with? What's something that they told me, or, whatever follow-up thing, or this work. I know that so-and-so had a project, and maybe I just run back and say, you did a really great job on that. How did that go? Or that presentation. And it takes time to figure out and remember those things. But I do think that is how we really form those connections that are what life's about, and help you actually feel lifted together versus just charging in by yourself.
Yeah. And I think you're very good at that. I mean, I can attest to it. I literally, before we started recording today, apologize for how I showed up in a meeting with Deanne the other day. I was just full tilt, million things going through my head, projects that were taking a lot of our energy, lots of turning and changing, and I just had a lot of things going on. So I came in just full on bleh. And Deanne's just always ready to take you right where you are. You are one of the best people I know at accepting people right where they sit, right where they are, and making them feel totally okay with that. And so so you do that really well. So I just wanted to speak to that example, because I think people also, if they see you being authentic, if they see you being vulnerable, if they see you being exactly who you are in every moment, it attracts that, and it invites it. It invites people to feel safe doing the same thing. And I think that's one of the best things we can do, just showing up for each other. I had a great episode with Megan Vanstone last season about that. She's in a very similar season of life as you, and similar age kids and kind of busyness. And she prioritizes her girlfriends in like high priority, and there's time for those relationships, knowing how important it is. And I hear and see you doing the same thing. I think that, moms in your 30s and 40s, when things are going crazy, make these a priority. They are difference makers, and how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your life, how you interact with your kids, knowing you've got those go-to people that want to help you and that you can help too. And I love also just thank you for being willing to ask for help unapologetically. Man, I think that is so important. And if we could do that, how much happier we would be. We would not, this martyr complex of feeling like we got to carry the world, could be quickly disseminated if we would be willing to just release that. And then again, that invites others to do the same with us, and kind of gives permission for us to all live that way. I love that. This importance of setting and coming back to either, you can call it your why or your values. And for a lot of people, their why defines their values, or their values define their why. Talk to me about that and how you frame that in everything you do, because you've got some very specific things that you are involved with and that you care about. So talk about how what's framed and how your why and your values frame that.
Yeah, I think we often it's really hard to narrow down what is your why, what is your values, to actually put some generalizations around that. But you kind of need them in order to create the life you love, right? And you look back and say, okay, these were the big things that I got to do. And, way back when we were wedding planning, I remember our planner said, you get to pick 3 things. You get to pick your top 3. Now you'll have choice over the other things, but if it's the dress, the food, the photography, or is it the people, the venue, the ring, whatever it is, that's about what you get. And I do think in life that's kind of true. In parenting, it's like, you might get about 3 big things that you're going to really fixate on and focus on, or in your general life and what you bring to people, or what your things are. And 2, a lot of ours have changed. There is a different seasons and different moments where that might kind of deconstruct and rechange, or this thing that you thought was a very specific value. Yeah. Maybe it has a different name, or maybe it's shifted a little bit. And that can feel really disorienting and make you reevaluate, like, what am I? Who am I? And that can come in, spiritual, emotional, your professional work. I see that happen a lot too. And I think there's also space to say, it can be very fluid, and there will be seasons where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing in this time. But but for me, I think that has been really helpful. And I was just listening to the more recent Brene Brown ones, and her thought is you really only get 2 values.
Yes.
I listened to that. I wanted to reject it so hard. I want to be like,
me too. I'm still trying to get down to my 2. I'm stuck down to your 5.
It's so hard. I know. I think my current are curiosity and community or connection. I can't decide what to name that one.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's like even that, because I went through about 10 iterations of that, and it's really tricky. But then when I do actually look at my life, I'm like, it's actually easier if you kind of have these things to help evaluate.
Yeah.
Is this thing right in my life, or is this job, or is this trip, or is this way that we're going to spend our money, or is this opportunity? Does it fit? And it gives you conversation and framework, whether that's with you, with a partner, with who you've built your life with your community, whatever the context is in your life. I do think it's really helpful to say, okay, here is what matters to me. So does this fit? And maybe it is curiosity or adventure, or so you're like, well, I'm just going to take a chance, or I don't actually have a choice. I just need to put food on the table, and this is what we're going to try. And that's okay too. Again,
seasons.
It's all this push and pull of naming these things and really having a firm grasp, and also letting things like be loose and change and shift.
Yeah,
but that has been huge for us, and I think in a lot of ways gives you freedom as you have structure. It's like with so many things, we kind of don't want to be nailed down, because we're like, you can't give me an Enneagram number. You can't give me a INTJ. Like, you can't actually say who I am. And then you're like, well, that's true. Everyone's very unique and different. But also sometimes having just shared language or those values named actually allow you to then kind of weave and figure out and evaluate, okay, what are some of the things that are important? What needs to go in this season? What am I what can I lay down? Where do I need to put some new energy into? Yeah. Okay, well, and how does that actually fit in here? Is that because I'm comparing to others, or is that because I want to do it? And that's actually something I want to lean into. So it shifts and change, but currently working on my 2. I think I got them. Call me Renee. I think I'm there, but I don't know. And also it'll probably change in 5 years, and that's all right. That's all right.
And I think that's important. I think it's a very important, you and Bo got married early, so it would make sense that your values are different now than they were then. I think so. Being willing to sit down and assess every few years. I think having values both as an individual and then collectively as your partner, because that's kind of what we're going through right now. Brady and I are identifying our values individually, but then we will come together and identify our values as partners, so that as we make decisions collectively. So but I think it's just a good thing to kind of go through. And you do want to address it because we're not the same people. If you're continuing to evolve and learn, those things are going to change. And so what you were doing 5 years ago, if you're still doing it now, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel aligned. It doesn't feel aligned with your inner voice or your inner knowing, then it's time to reassess the values. And that's okay too. Because you want to live where you currently are, not at outdated values just for the sake of, well, that's what so-and-so thought I should be, or that's what the church is telling me, or the culture is telling me. It's like, no, this is where I sit today, and this is what I've learned. So thank you for your insight on that. I love that kind of fluidity, like scaffolding, but framework, but also willingness to learn and change as I think we know. I think we feel it in our souls when things are getting off kilter. Let's move into living out of your own expectations versus others. You've had a bit of a journey in that. You moved out of Texas, away from family. That's just one thing. So talk about that.
Yes, I think it is hard but helpful to even identify what your own expectations are. I think it's very normal to, especially in kind of those high school, college, young professional years, evaluate off of others. Like there's a lot of more side-looking comparison, even in young motherhood to some extent. Like you are like, is your baby walking? Are they eating? Are they doing these things? And kind of going off of that. There's also then the pressure of others that you feel, whether it's said or unsaid, as what does a mom look like? What is a role look like? What does being 20 and a millennial in this time look like? What does life in pandemic look like? Like there's all types of things and voices coming at you. Yeah. Sometimes really obviously, sometimes not. Sometimes it's your own voice that you have not even given the actual time to hear.
Sure.
What is coming in here. But I think for me, I have seen that the other thing with expectations that I do think is interesting is I had a mentor for a long time talk about like they're just resentments waiting to happen. And I think there's some truth in that. And I think it's important because you will often see your anger or resentment pop up due to an expectation. Sure. And it takes sometimes a while to actually thread that through and realize that that's what's happening. And that's usually yourself. Like that's usually you saying, it's kind of a boundary thing as well of, okay, something is awry here and I'm having a reaction. What is this actually connected to? Yeah. But I also think holding the only version of myself that I can actually, or the only thing I can compare is my own versions of myself in the past of like, how am I doing in this season compared to who I've been, or where am I at in this journey? Whether again, that's maybe what I think politically or spiritually, or how I'm mothering, or how I'm showing up in my relationships, how I'm doing with my emotions, how I'm doing with my physical health. Like really the only true evaluation that's helpful is your own self. And I think having, again, just the clarity of what are my expectations or what do I want in this next 5 years? Yeah. And again, it can get really existential to say, well, who knows? And especially in a time like this and pandemic, when I've tried to do this practice, it feels really gray and elusive and sometimes depressing because you're like, well, we didn't know. So we're going to have a planet in 5 years. I think we are. Spoiler alert. We're all going to probably still be here, hopefully. But then to say, okay, well, what do I want that to look like? And now for my own self, what are some ways that I can move forward in that? And I think it's really hard to name those different expectations because sometimes then you have to hold the relationships in your life and evaluate those. And
where do the boundaries fit? Now that I've identified these expectations, what kind of boundaries do I have to lay to be able to really be true to those?
Right. And how can I walk forward? And sometimes that needs to have a conversation with people. A lot of times it doesn't. A lot of times that's your own self saying like, oh, wow, okay, I'm picking up on these things. Or this person says a lot of this type of thing in this space. And I'm really, that's starting to rub me and that's really putting on some weight here. And so how do I need to make some shifts or put up boundaries or change my time or those different things? And again, I think all of that just feels weighty in the moment. If I don't want to take time to think about it, I don't want to have to, name it, but it's such beneficial work. And again, you do have to kind of come back to it over and over again in some ways because it will shift and looking at, again, your own self, or even noticing when do I start looking sideways, like a kid on the playground in first grade of like, well, what house do they have or what trips are they taking? And okay, well, is that because you actually want those things? Or is that the professional move you actually want to make? Or are you just feeling these expectations and a path before you? And I think that's going to just continue evolving. I definitely think I'm in a lot better space now than I was 10 years ago or 15 looking back. But I'm sure in 20 years, I'll say the same thing. I'm like, oh, sweet Deanne. She sure thought she was, doing her thing on her own, but she was really getting, a lot of other contexts there. But yeah, I think with expectations, it can be really hard to hear the voices or just to realize where you're letting those things drive you. But it's important because it matters. It's where you're spending all of these different energies and times and flow and really driving where you're headed for the future and those different.
Yeah. And does it align with those values and the whys and the things you care about and the self-care and emotional care and, all those things. I mean, it's all kind of tied together in this matrix, so to speak. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves, which I think this fits in nice with expectations, because we've talked a lot about how we have different iterations throughout our life and we shift and we change, and where we are now isn't where we were 15 years ago. And that's okay. So, but talk about those layers, because we don't tend to want to dive into the muck of what made us sometimes. And it's not all the pretty pictures that we see on Instagram and the fun pictures of you and your kids sledding in the snow. How many fights did they have that day putting on their snow clothes before you got out sled?
Oh, exactly.
Those kinds of things. Talk to me about those layered aspects.
Well, even just this week, I saw a meme that was like, there's no one I hate more than my own timeline status 10 years ago on Facebook. Because, sometimes it tells you like what you said back then. No one's even doing statuses now, I feel like. But
no.
I resonated with that so deeply. I was like, oh my goodness. And it's so easy for me to just like want to disembody and be like, oh, that Deanne, she had no idea what was going on. Or like, but to actually also hold space like, wow, she was doing the best she could with what she had. And she really thought that. Or I really felt like I needed to share that because I needed to show that I had friends in this moment. And did I even like those people? I don't know, but it's helpful to say like that is what was happening.
Right. And extending yourself grace and remembering and seeing your growth.
And being okay with, yeah, you know what? I've said or blogged or wrote or read a lot of things, even in the last 3 years, that I probably don't stand by right now.
Right.
And that is sometimes really hard and ugly to look at and to acknowledge. And it's also, again, a little bit tricky to see how much you can change and grow in different ways and to still be like, yeah, I'm still me. And that's okay too.
Right.
And on the flip side too, I think a different way to even look at this is like the shadow self, like our inner critics. I am such a bully to myself, and it can be really easy for me to act like that terrible string of curse words constantly is there. It's like, oh no, I'm not that mean to myself. Like when I hear other kids or other people, but actually a lot of times I'm like, no, I didn't have people ever talk about that. Like until I started listening to different podcasts or like had a few friends that were like, I am horrible. If you actually listen to the stream of conscious thoughts about literally pretty much everything, like whether it's how my house looks or how I look or what I'm doing today or how I just treated somebody or all the things. And again, I think actually to fully be yourself, you've got to see that. And sometimes that can be in a state of actually needing professional help and care. Sometimes that can be helped through with therapy or practices. Other times I think that that's just who we are. And, depending on the extreme severity of some of those situations, that is a new thing. I don't remember. And part of it is just life and you're a kid, but like, I don't remember hearing and seeing women or people in the adults in my life when I grew up talking about how you have to sit with a lot of things in your own self and in your own past. You don't always love that you shifted or, wow, you know what? I used to really think this about this situation, or I used to vote about it in this way, or I was told in my religious context that these were the hills to die on. And you know what? I don't believe that now. And I've shifted. And here's 20 other ways to look at it. And here's the 20 people in our lives that we love, that think all these things. And that's okay. Like,
yes. 100%. Yep.
And so just, I think I've become a lot more broken open in those ways. It can be hard to see and to name those moments, but it's been really beautiful too, to realize, okay, like this is all there and this is all me. And again, I think raising kids and specifically with some of our situations in foster care and dealing with people struggling with addiction and dealing with really traumatized children, like again, you see this almost animalistic response in really young behavior. And then I just see it in myself too. I'm like, oh man, I do that. Or I think that too. Or I want to respond like that when I'm feeling like things are out of control. And it actually, again, it provides so much more grace and permission and love and acceptance that I didn't have 10 minutes before when I kind of didn't acknowledge that my own self experienced that. Again, I think life's evolved, and I think there's a lot more of this language and context in general now than 20 years ago, likely. And so I'm very hopeful about where we'll all be, where our kids are going to be, the types of conversations I'm having with friends and family that I don't think I would have had 10 or 15 years ago. But I think, again, that all kind of starts with self. That does start with me, sitting with me, being okay with all this, naming this. And then I have to practice sitting with others and allowing those, because I still want to reject a lot of times. Like the thing I see in myself that I don't like, or the behavior that I'm like, can we just put a smile on and have a good time? Like, why is this so difficult? Why is it so difficult? And then I'm like, oh yeah, at the core, I still kind of just want everybody to like shut up and be happy and do what I want, which is like the true human experience, I think, at the end of the day. And it's like, no, it's not actually true. Like, that's not actually what I want. But it feels never ending in certain ways, like almost weekly. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, here's that. Here's who I am here. Here's what I'm still thinking. But I think holding that and being okay with like how many funny different, on the surface level, like clothing phases we've gone through, or hair phases, or makeup, but then also what that often goes under of, and I've changed a lot. And I'm layered, and I'm going to change a lot in other ways. And what I think is right is going to shift, and that's okay too.
Yeah. But I think you said a couple of important things. I think one, the whole reason I started this podcast was because of the bump I hit at age 50 about not talking about all these things and not growing up in environments where we were having these conversations. And I was like, let's start talking about this. Let's get people talking about this. Let's get women talking about this. Let's get 20 somethings dealing with this stuff, and 30 somethings and 40 somethings. And let's not, and for my friends in my 50s and 60s and 70s, it's not too late.
Right.
let's do it now. But it starts with, I think it's very difficult to accept other people's layers if you don't first become okay with your own.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an ongoing journey. I mean, my self-talk is awful when if I really stop to look at it and sit in it. And so I've really trying to use would I say that to my daughter? Would I say that to my best friend? Would I say that to my husband, my partner, my coworker? I'm really good at affirming other people, in the workplace, with my daughters, with, people that are on the podcast staff with me, with my partner. So what happens if I do extend that to myself? I mean, but yeah, I think it does start with that. Us and just being willing to sit in those things and just talking about it. Let's just have these conversations and own what's hard and how can we do this together and help each other out. In summary, in Living Out Feel, Finding Empowerment, Embracing Layers, the name of our podcast, how does this affect the quality of your relationships? Because I think all these things we've talked about really feed into the quality of our relationships, the type of relationships we want for ourselves, and how we are and how we show up in our relationships.
I think you're exactly right. I think it has a direct correlation, a huge impact. It allows you to really go deep and keep finding different layers and connections with even the same people you have in your life. And again, it gives you different contexts and values, or a way to say, I'm kind of checking this out, or I'm not so sure about this. Would you read this, or have you heard anything, or have you read anything, or do you want to go watch this movie with me? I don't know. Let's just see what we think.
Yeah.
Again, giving you a little bit of a path forward. And I think too, a lot of us in this past few years have, depending on where you've lived geographically, I don't even think it really matters. A lot got stripped down and a lot did kind of boil in. And what I was naming a few weeks ago was I miss that middle layer of people where you're not good friends, but they are following up with you because they at least kind of know context. So usually it's your parents at the pickup lines, or your grocery store, or maybe who you were working out at a gym with that you had classes with, or not necessarily your best friend, may not even have their phone numbers, but you know enough about them. Right. And that is gone. That whole group of people is kind of gone. And I think in some ways that allows us to build something new. And this also happens if you move, or you're deployed, or you have a change in career or college or whatever. And I think hopefully it allows us to go deep rather than wide. And sometimes you need seasons of wide, and you need to have a lot of that. But I also think a lot of times what this whole pandemic time and just kind of reshifting has taught us is okay, we can actually have a lot less than we thought also. And so now as we build forward and kind of move in a different direction, what do we actually want and what do we actually need? And I know for myself, I don't want to just return to hustling, busy, being involved with a lot going on and having little touch points, a million Facebook friends, but not very many people intimately in my life, and not necessarily even having the time because I haven't created that value. So I think that even just living in this and taking that time and really even taking space to evaluate your relationships and the quality of them. And maybe there are some that feel a little plateaued. And so is there a change that we can do, or a conversation to be had, or something we can try in this season, or maybe just take a break and invest in a little different way or space?
Yeah.
But I think it does a lot to grow how those relationships look.
So we're at the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
I'm going to go with kind of what's in the winter, more recent. That is what is here. I have been really loving on the story front. I like to read. That's always a basic one, but I have been enjoying LeVar Burton-Reeves' podcast. He is the Reading Rainbow guy, and he just reads different stories that are about 30 minutes, and they're really great. And he starts each story with a deep breath in and out. And so even if that's one of the only times my week or day that I remember,
wow.
I'm actually gonna breathe. So because breathing's a big one.
Sure.
I am loving boba tea. That's something that me and my sons go do, and it has still endured even in the winter because it's kind of cold, but it's still been great. Okay. Taking walks with our husky. That has been one in this season. She's been loving the cold and loving the snow. And there's little bunny rabbits around our neighborhood that she's just sniffing out and trying to have all the fun. I'm oh girl, but I am a lot more aware. Even just walking a dog, I'm like, oh, I stop and listen a little bit more, look, or just, take a little bit of time. And then the other one is going to be, I've taken more time in the last few weeks to like call some friends that I've missed. And I think that's a good evaluator for me, even sometimes on the self-care, kind of going back to the beginning. There are a few friendships that we might not talk except for once every like 3 to 6 months or whatever that looks like. But I actually literally just wrote out their names and I was like, who have I not checked in with in a while? And oh, wow. Okay. It's been a bit. I need to do that. And so it's been really great to have that in the last week or so.
That's a great idea. That's a great way to do that. All right. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
I want to feel more centered. I think that is something I'm leaning into, energized. I want to bring more joy. I'm a big fun facilitator, but I don't always feel the joy, if that makes sense. I think that's one of the Enneagram things I heard was I'm a 3, which is the achiever. So I tend to drive toward goals. And they were like, you don't wait for the confetti to fall. You create these events or these moments or these things, and you don't stay for like the confetti to fall. And so that's been a picture I've really been thinking about.
Yeah. I like that. I like that visual.
Yeah, it was helpful. Where I'm like, oh yeah, I facilitate these trips for my kids, and then I don't actually like take a minute or like I facilitate this one party or this, and then I don't actually like look around the room and be like, wow, this is a great time. What a blast! I'm not like moving forward to, and how are we going to clean this up? And like, who's taking a picture? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that same present.
Yes. And I think 5 is my 5th word is going to be present. I'm really wanting to be present in this season and kind of carry some of that slowness. In our community, things have still been way slower to return back out of pandemic. And to some extent, that's been really good for me because it's not my pace at all. And it has really forced me to kind of slow it down and think through, what do I need? What do I miss? What do I actually want? And so I'm hoping that sense of presence will carry through this year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I knew this would be a great conversation and you'd have a lot to offer, and it was. So thank you so much. Podcast audience, you can learn more about Deanne on our website, embracinglayers.com, where you'll be able to find sources that she loves and learn about her more in the show notes. Follow us at Embracing Layers on Instagram as we highlight this episode throughout the week and her sound bites and ideas and talking points. And thanks for the time today. Thanks for joining us. And Deanne, thanks for your wisdom and your friendship. I'm so glad that I get to know you.
Well, thank you for having me. And we are cheering you on in the podcast community. I'm excited to champion with you and support this awesome passion project.